Morning, everybody. Welcome to Brunch with Brandon. Got my Victor's coffee here. Hope everybody's having a good Sunday and enjoying the sunshine this weekend. We're going to spend our time here this morning talking a little bit about the election impacts to markets and tax and legislation landscape ahead. So excited to kind of jump in here this morning. For those who joined us, if you're on here and joined us Thursday as well, this will be a little bit of a recap. We actually spent more like 45 minutes on this just a couple days ago. So this will be a higher level version, but we just want to talk a little bit about how the elections, may impact some of the factors that we're watching ahead with. Obviously the stock market, given the challenging year, but also some legislation changes or not that may be ahead and how that can factor into the market as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick it off. So thanks everybody for joining us here this morning. Again, the whole purpose for today's session is we want to talk a little bit about how the recent midterm elections may start to shape things up as far as both tax, legislation, and market landscapes in the years to come. So maybe to kind of frame up our entire conversation here this morning, what I want to share is that the primary theme is really gridlock. Like if you're going to walk away with one word from today's conversation, it's gridlock. And what I mean by that is that with a split Congress, the House Republicans, the Senate Democrats, there's really probably not going to be a lot of changes going on whatsoever here's the key, as we move into 2023. So keep that in mind. I think we'll talk a little bit about what may happen between now and then too. But really 2023 through the presidential election, it's unlikely we'll see a whole lot of changes necessarily because we're going to have this split split Congress, So first, before we talk about the gridlock moving into next year, let's spend a little time talking about where we are today. So obviously the elections have gone through. We kind of know what we're looking at moving forward next year. But the question is, well, what's going to happen in the meantime? So we're here November 20th here today. And obviously none of these elections actually carry through, the results carry through until next year. So typically what we see in this type of scenario is that there typically is going to be some sort of something passed through the end of the year. And the reason for that is that, call it political games, call it theatrics, whatever you want to call it. But generally speaking, the party that kind of controls the House and the Senate before they're about to lose the control will try and get a win, so to speak, through the end of the year. So I think it's very likely we see something go through by the end of the year. It's hard to say what that would look like, but for those who kind of listen to us pretty frequently, we've been talking about this bill, the Secure Act 2.0, and I think that may be a good, kind of bipartisan legislation that may actually get through. Now, here's the thing to be aware of, is that typically what we see in these scenarios is even though we've maybe got this bipartisan bill, because they know that this is the last year to maybe slip some things in there, usually things will shift a little bit. So although the core of that bill may still be about retirement, we will see, but generally we may see some other stuff kind of slipped into there as well through year end, knowing that this may be kind of the last chance to get some things through before we go into this split Congress. Okay? So that's really important to watch. Moving into next year, I think there's a few key things to watch. So number one, again, let's go back to this word gridlock, because everything I'm going to talk about really revolves around that, and that's inaction. So there's probably not going to be any changes to welfare benefits. Obviously the Social Security, the Medicare conversation is really difficult in the first place. And with the presidential election coming up in 2024, very, very unlikely that we will see either side try and tackle this today, right? There's a bigger election on the horizon, and I'm sure both Democrats and Republicans are paying attention to that and saying, let's not upset the apple cart. Yet again, we'll kind of kick the can down the road. I really doubt we'll see any tax changes. Something that's really important to watch here is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, some people may remember that from the Trump administration, that was a kind of a sweeping tax change, but that is set to expire or sunset at the end of 2025. So here's the situation, right? We've got the presidential election coming up in 2024. We've got the midterms now with a split Congress. Will there be any tax changes? I don't believe we will see any tax changes over the next 2 years. But then as we move into the new president's first year in office, I think that might be where we see tax changes. Because again, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, is set to expire end of 2025. We'll have a new president starting in 2025, right? The 2024 elections will put him in office in 2025. So very, very likely that at that point we could see some tax changes before that just expires. Lastly, which is kind of tied to tax changes, but I doubt we'll see any estate tax exemption changes either. This was a big push for the Biden administration, but for those who have been following, the Build Back Better plan is where they had talked about reducing the estate tax exemption. That was not in there. So I really doubt that we'll see this, especially with I think what came out of the midterm elections is a lot of uncertainty. I don't think either party really ran away with anything. And so I think that both parties are going to be really conservative, really cautious is maybe a better word for it, in the coming years, because they know how touchy this presidential election probably will be as we move into 2024. So that's the biggest thing I would touch on there. But I will also share that what this term gridlock typically means for markets is a good thing. So I'm not saying that just because we know what's going on with House and Senate that markets are gonna, crawl out of this thing. But generally speaking, when we have gridlock, the markets like that. They know that there are no changes coming, good or bad. I'm not sure how to interpret that, but at the end of the day, markets typically do well in a gridlock scenario because there's nothing to surprise us, if that makes sense. Okay. In fact, this is a really interesting stat. No third year of a president's term have the markets been down since 1950. All right, let that sink in for a minute. Now, I don't think that necessarily means that this year is going to be different, because there's so much going on right now. It's really hard to say that just because historically that's been the case, that 2023 will be a good year. That said, obviously, if we are in a recession then and we start to crawl out, it's very possible. I think most of this is due to the fact that in the third year of the term, the Senate and the House, kind of can change seats. So a lot of times we'll see this gridlock scenario, and again, markets like that. But we're also unlikely to see that the election have any impact on the Fed's path. I think there's a lot of talk out there that this is going to impact the Fed in any way, and I just don't think that's the case. I think that the Fed has been very clear that they are, maybe unbiased in maybe a different way, though. I think that maybe they have some incentives in different routes, but not political. I think it's been very clear that they've separated from that. So I don't think it'll have any impact on the Fed. I think it's very likely that we see less spending and possible more investment into some of the oil and gas type of sectors. So in that type of scenario, it's possible that we see inflation, that start to help a little bit with inflation as well. Fed's obviously on a war path against inflation, and then if we maybe see a little less spending and maybe some more investment in oil and gas to reduce the cost of energy prices at the pump, that certainly could help. But I think it's going to take some time for that to work its way through. So I think that's the general theme that we're really looking at. Again, biggest thing I would share is gridlock. So the end of the year is going to be really important. We'll see if something kind of slips through. Moving into next year, we're certainly going to be in a gridlock situation. However, one more thing to add to this equation to kind of keep you thinking about what 2023 may look like. So we have this situation of this debt ceiling. We talked about spending briefly. The debt ceiling is nothing new. We've been kind of going back and forth on this for years now, and obviously we keep brushing up against it. So if you remember, I think it was 2016. Anyways, go back a few years, you might remember that there was this constant battle about this debt ceiling and this government shutdown type of situation that may come up. I think that it's very likely we get back to something similar to that. So I don't think that this means the government will shut down. Let me be very clear on that. But I think that we'll see a lot of political theatrics coming up next year where it's all about blaming the other side, or we want to pass this great bill, but we can't get it through because the Democrats won't do this or the Republicans won't do that. I think, again, at the end of the day, that's just because they know it won't get through, and it, it helps for the election coming up. But what they're also going to do is really use these debt ceiling timeframes and this, this government shutdown as a kind of a scare tactic or a way to blame the other party as well. So I think what we may see in that scenario is Republicans may get some things they want out of that to let the other side kind of lift the debt ceiling. But at the end of the day, it's probably going to be a lot of noise, a lot of short-term volatility around those timelines, when at the end of the day, I don't know that the government will actually shut down. I think it'll just get close. So hopefully that's helpful. Again, if you're going to take away one thing out of this, gridlock is the key. Markets like gridlock. Probably doesn't mean any tax changes, but obviously it will remain to be seen what 2023 has in store for us. So thank you, of course, for joining me here this morning. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your Sunday. Enjoy the sunshine and stay warm.